our idea of who we are, of this place we live in, our whole reality, it depends on our brains. Our brains construct this world for us that we take completely for granted. We don't realize that it's actually a construction. It's all an illusion. The self is an illusion. You don't actually have an ego. You don't have a self. Space and time don't really exist. They're this kind of weird, distorted mirror that we live through, but they don't actually exist. And the most amazing thing of all is, I'm alive. Wow.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. Thank you all for coming. This is very cool. So what we're going to do is Robert and I are going to talk for a little bit, and then we'll open it up to questions from all of you. And we'll do this. Where should we put that?
I'm going to hold it here for security just so I don't fall.
And you can tap it for emphasis.
Exactly. And I get really angry.
Yes. I thought we should start with our mutual first love. A thing I think some people think is dry or dusty or boring, although if they thought that, they probably came to the wrong talk and are reading the wrong two authors. But there's something about history that I think lights me up, and I know it lights you up. Talk to me about why history does that and why it's so important for people to read.
Okay, first off, I want to say I'm incredibly honored to see so many people here. I'm from Los Angeles. I know at least half of you are here to see Ryan, but still, I'm deeply honored. I live a very lonely life, so seeing all these people is pretty incredible. Well, you know, thank you. I mean it. So for the past 28 years, I can say that I've spent an incredible amount of time with dead people, right? I've probably interacted more with the dead than the living during that time, you know, all the books that I read. And so I have a very particular relationship to the dead. I'm not talking about the rock group, mind you, okay? So, you know, first of all, when you focus on what it means to be alive, I like to start there. So each one of you in the audience is alive. You have your own particular consciousness, your own sort of mindset. And it has this sort of texture to it, this day-by-day texture that kind of makes who you are. It's your daily thoughts, it's your obsessions, it's your patterns, it's your emotions, etc. And it's hard to qualify. You can't feel it, you can't taste it or see it, but it's who you are and you live it. And then when it comes to decisions in your life, there's moments where you could go this direction, that direction, this direction, and you choose a path. And sometimes it's the wrong path, sometimes it's a good path. I can honestly say I never intended in my life to write the 48 Laws of Power. I didn't start out at 8 years old. I'm going to write the 48 Laws of Power. I kind of went like this. And I ended up doing it, you know, by chance almost. So when we look at the past and we look at those who lived before us, they are the same as you and I right now. They had the same consciousness, the same sort of sense of time, of being in the present. They were alive. They had that little filter that made them who they were, their individuality, their emotions, their big choices in life. And so when I write about history, and I read a lot of books of history, and I can tell you 98% of them bore the crap out of me. They are so boring. They are so dry. They just list George Washington on November 4th. He woke up, he talked to his troops. That afternoon, he crossed the Delaware River, blah, 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 blah. It's like we make the dead people even more dead than they are, right? So, but they're alive. They're in the moment. They're excited. They're dealing with the same things that you're dealing with right now. So I often think of the example that comes to my mind when I write, because I'm trying to, when I write about a character, to make the reader feel that they're alive, just like you are right now. I think of Julius Caesar at the moment when he was about to cross the Rubicon and enter into the civil war against Pompey, one of the most dramatic moments in history. And if you put yourself in his shoes, here's this man who's just been through the Gallic Wars, incredibly violent, you know, with the barbarians of France, the Gauls and all that he'd been through and seen so many deaths, nearly died. And here he is with 50,000 troops. And if he crosses the river, it's civil war. And he's facing Pompey, who's got an army 5 times his size, right? And we just think he just crosses the river and he says the die is cast and such. But no, he's afraid, he's hesitant. He knows that if he crosses, he's probably going to die, right? And lots of his men are going to die. It's an incredibly dramatic moment. And he's hesitating and he's thinking about the options. And he's thinking about where he came from, where this will be at the end of his life. And then he comes to that moment where he decides to cross it. But that's like incredibly dramatic. It's not like this just fact. It wasn't like he was fated, he had to cross the Rubicon. It was a choice that he made. And I want to give a feeling, when you're reading books about history, that these people are alive, that they're living through moments just like you, and to make history something so much more exciting and dramatic and romantic in a way.
Yeah, the great biographer David McCullough, he said something that I really loved. He said, you can never lose sight of the fact of 2 things. One, that they didn't live in the past, they lived in the present.
Yeah.
And 2, it could have gone differently, right? And so that what we're talking about in our books, what he's talking about in his books, what you're talking about there with Julius Caesar, is that he didn't have to do it. It was only a foregone conclusion after it happened. And so when you can see history as this sort of snapshot of something as it's happening, as opposed to something that did happen, it becomes exciting, really exciting. Yes, there's the fact that there's been the spoiler that you vaguely know what happened because you heard about it in school, or all this art is based on. But if you can go back and you're reading it and you go, no, they were really wrestling with something. There was something hanging in the balance here. And the great man of history theory is obviously less in vogue today than it was in the past. But to go like, if this person had chosen differently, if something had gone a little bit differently, all of the events that came after would have gone differently. And so suddenly the stakes become very high, and you really feel the humanness of that moment, as opposed to just a bunch of dry sentences in a book.
Yeah, there's a whole series of books out called What If? And they're fascinating. I don't know if you ever read them. And so they go through history. If one little detail had turned differently, all of history would have been rewritten, and probably, I don't know where we would be. So one of the best examples is the Mongols under Genghis Khan, their invasion of Europe. And they were on the verge of going to Vienna and conquering Vienna, and then all of Europe would open up. And then I think it was Genghis Khan died, and they all had to return for his funeral because that was their religion. And so they never did it. But if he had died a week later, and they had launched their invasion of Vienna, all of European history would have been completely altered. And these are amazing things to consider.
And it's the sort of macro, enormous events like this, and then on a much smaller level, like with what I write about, I think something that struck me as I'm reading Meditations is Marcus Aurelius thanks his philosophy teacher Rusticus, who gives him his copy of Epictetus's lectures. And so if that doesn't happen, if the teacher doesn't recommend a book to the student, and then the student doesn't read the book that I'm reading in this moment doesn't exist, and then the whole notion of the philosopher King Marcus Aurelius' life goes perhaps differently. And so how just as our lives individually can be changed by the single intervention of a person or an idea or a book at the right time, at the right place, that's also happening historically with these people that you're reading about. A single, Theodore Roosevelt's father doesn't say, hey, you're smart, but you're weak, and you've got to get strong. These singular moments change the course of someone's life, and thus history that follows.
I'll take it one step further. If you hadn't come and contacted me some 16 years ago, right? You wouldn't have been writing about the Stoics and had your books, and people wouldn't be reading about Marcus Aurelius from you right now.
And none of these people would be here, and in fact, they might not even exist.
Exactly.
I love what you said about living or interacting with the dead, because that's also a very Stoic idea. Do you know about the prophecy that Zeno gets from the oracle at Delphi?
Refresh me.
So he's a young man, and he's a merchant, so he's traveling all around, and he stops at the Delphi, and he goes in the oracle, and he gets his prophecy, and they tell him, you will become wise when you begin to have conversations with the dead. And the whole point of the oracle is that you never know what they're talking about, and it's vague, and the meaning reveals itself to you later. And it's not until he suffers the shipwreck, he washes up in Athens, he has nothing, and he sort of stumbles into a bookstore. And
they had bookstores?
Yeah. Well, where do they get these books? I mean, they're not, your and my books, but this is where you're buying the scrolls.
Okay.
Or the writing materials.
Well, I didn't know that.
Selling books. Yeah, of course. So, I mean, we don't know the name, right? Is it an indie bookstore? Is it a chain bookstore?
Okay. Right.
But he ends up in this. He ends up in this bookstore, and the bookseller is reading one of Plato's dialogues, or I guess it would have been one of Xenophon's books. Yeah. He's reading Socrates on the choice of Hercules. And it's in this moment that Zeno realizes what the prophecy means, that you'll become wise when you begin to have conversations with the dead. That's what reading is. That's what history is. That's what books are. It's the way that these people come alive. It was as if Socrates was in that bookstore with him.
That's right.
It was as if Hercules was in that bookstore with him.
Right.
Because that's what the power of even bad history is. But great history, vividly written history, it's a chance to
there are these hundreds of thousands, millions of incredibly wise men and women who lived before us. They have all these amazing things to teach us about how to live in the present, right? All these lessons for us. And to ignore that is just unbelievably stupid, right? Mm-hmm. And so, history is a compendium of all of the most incredible human mistakes ever made. It's a compendium of human stupidity.
Yes.
And we have
the dumbest people and the smartest people are all in books.
Yeah. So there's so much to learn from that, and to ignore that incredible wealth that's sitting before you is, to me, kind of tragic.
Well, it's worse than tragic if you're in a position of leadership, if you're a parent, if you have anyone that is dependent on you in any way, because you're going to be learning by trial and error or by painful experience, and they're going to have to pay that bill with you, right? So the idea that, you're in uncharted territory or you're on breaking new ground, you're not at all. People have been in this exact place as you, or an analogous place as you. Not only have they been there, but someone's been there and they did it well, and someone's been there and didn't do enough. Someone's been there and fucked it up. And how would you not avail yourself of that information? The idea of sort of starting where they left off is so vastly superior than going, I want to start from scratch.
Well, there's one other aspect to history, though. There's one kind of caveat there. If you watch a lot of movies nowadays that are kind of historical dramas, you look at them, people are acting just like people nowadays. They talk like they talk nowadays. They're swearing, etc. They look like anybody that you would see on Hollywood Boulevard on Friday afternoon, right?
Sure.
But it's totally bogus. It's a complete myth. There's a book called The Past is a Foreign Country, right? And it's true. The people in the past, they have the same emotions as us, but their cultural differences are vast. They don't think the same way. So the other great thing about history is, for instance, I was obsessed, obviously, with Machiavelli and the Italian Renaissance, but also with the French court of Louis XIV. And I really got into what it was like to be in the court at Versailles. And the way of thinking and the formality and the rituals is not at all how we think nowadays. And so we're so locked into our cultural moment with our phones and our politics and everything now that we don't realize that there are other ways to think. There are other perspectives on life. And history can open up a completely alien way of looking at problems, etc., if you're culturally sensitive, if you spend the time researching them.
Well, there's a narcissism. You think
Yeah.
everyone's like you, everyone thinks the same way as you. In the same way we do this to animals, like you're projecting onto your dog that your dog's that, but in fact your dog has, there's a German word, is it Umwelt? You know,
Umwelt, yeah.
the experience that they're having is different.
Yeah.
It's defined by their species, it's defined by their limitations, it's defined by the moment of time you're in. And so, yeah, there's something really trippy in the past where you can see yourself in it and you go back and you feel connected to it. And then there's other parts that are so inexplicable and impossible to fully understand. And I think you have to have both in your head at the same time.
That's so true. You know what? I'm going to give you another German word now.
Okay.
Ungeheimlich. It's the uncanny. And that's the definition of the uncanny. Something that's both familiar and strange at the same time, like in a dream.
Yeah.
Something that seems like, I kind of know that person, but I don't know them. And that's what history is like. Yeah, it's very true.
I like even that it's a foreign country because people are people, right? So you travel to another country and they're still you, they still do most of the same things they do, but then they have these cultural assumptions that are so different or ways of being, and you just go, oh, that's very different. And then it forces you to think about why you do the things that you do. Some of the things you go, that's a bad way of doing it, and other ways, why do we do it the way that we do it?
Well, I'm writing a book on the sublime right now, and I have a chapter on pagan religions, and I got very deeply into Greek religion and the gods, and their notion of religion and gods is so alien to us, but it's so beautiful, and it's actually something that you can think about in the present and apply to your life. Their idea is gods are not these living entities out there in the sky, you know, like we see in movies. They're these kind of vibrating presence in nature that you feel kind of pass through you, an energy that passes through you. So that when Aphrodite passes through you, it creates this kind of weird sexual energy in you. But when Demeter passes through you, it creates a whole different feeling, or another god, or Zeus, or whatever. There's a presence in the world that passes through you and takes hold of you and possesses you. But this idea of being possessed by nature, by other forces outside of us, is actually, to me, very relevant in the future. I don't believe in Zeus. I don't worship Zeus, right? But there is something actually there that when you think about it, there is some truth to how they were describing the universe.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, it makes sense. And I think, sometimes we go, oh, they can't really have believed these things because we're sort of projecting our modern cynicism backwards, but they did.
Oh, very much so, very much so. Yeah, I describe in the book the Eleusinian mysteries and the actual route they take to go to Eleusis and the whole process. And I take you through it, and it's like this incredible drug experience, and they actually did have hallucinogenic drugs at the end, right? But the sense of being possessed by this God is very real. They believe it, and they take you on this journey where you actually think that you die, because they put you in this situation where you feel like you've died and everything is dark around you, etc., and then you're reborn. It's very dramatic and very powerful and very real.
This is a slight aside, but I was telling my oldest the story of Odysseus, and I had this weird experience. I'm telling him, the story of the Cyclops, and the Cyclops asks Odysseus what his name is, and he says, "My name is No Man." And so I can watch him sort of note that, and then I'm telling the whole story, and then you get to the punchline of, who did this to me? And he says, "No man." Who did this to you? He says, "No man." And he just starts cracking up, like he gets the joke. He's laughing very, very hard, and it's this moment. It's like, here's this 3, 4, several 1,000-year-old joke that's landing as if I just came up with it right then, and the timelessness of that. And so many parts of the Odyssey are inexplicable. As he gets there, not to spoil the ending, but there's just this sort of moment at the end where he just murders with his bare hands like 100 people, and it's just like, of course he did, right?
Doesn't he kill
murders all the suitors?
Bow and arrow?
Well, he and his son Telemachus, they slaughter them.
Yeah.
It's a very brutal ending, which I had to skip over. But the point is...
Oh, you mean to your son?
Yes. The point is, some parts
Why would you skip over that?
Well, he's
Children love that
young.
kind of stuff.
6 felt a little young to have 100 people be murdered.
Oh, not for me, I tell you, not for me.
This may have been why you ended up writing the 48 Laws of Power. Someone told you some dark stories when you were 6.
Very true.
But so some parts of it beyond comprehension, and then other parts work perfectly, and that's, I think, encapsulates what it means to be.
Yeah.
So talking about the distant past, of course, but then they were in the present moment. I think one of the things I took during COVID, it struck me as someone who loves history. You have these sort of all these moments that are happening right after each other, and I just had this thought. I was like, oh, this is what living through history feels like. Because it wasn't fun to go through the things that I like to read about that get me excited. I, of course, know what happened, and I'm only largely hearing about the people who survived. But you're like, it's not necessarily fun to live through history. That's the Chinese expression about may you live in interesting times. What do you think of the present moment we're in now? You talk a lot about the zeitgeist and laws of human nature. What do you think about where we are now?
Well, each period tends to have a kind of feel to it, right? Like the 20s, it was kind of the wildness after World War I. People are going crazy. Alcohol, sex, the whole thing. The 30s, the depression and reaction to that. Then the 40s and the war years. And the 50s and Eisenhower, and we all know the 60s, Okay? And I personally am old enough, I can actually say I lived through the 60s and the 70s, right? And the 70s were kind of like this great hangover from the 60s. But I think about now, and my whole thing is, what is it going to be? How are people 100 years from now going to be writing about this present moment that we're in? And the strange thing is I can't really get a handle on it. I really feel like we live in this time that is so weird and chaotic that it's really hard to put a name on it. It's really hard to figure out what is actually going on. And I think 100 years from now, maybe they will understand it, but it's so strange. So we don't have like large belief systems anymore. Like there was the war, there was communism versus the West. It was capitalism, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and all these tremendous dramatic moments we lived through, 9/11, et cetera. But what is kind of defining this? What unifies us? So in the 20s or the 60s, you had like the wildness going on, the sex, the alcohol, the drugs. And then you had the reaction against it, people who were very conservative. Right. But it was kind of this one whole fabric. I can't find anything like that right now. I think a lot of it comes from technology and the internet, where we're all so splintered that there's really hard to tell a story about what we're living through right now. And that's kind of how I define it. I've never really come upon a moment in history that I can say about that. And I think we're actually hungering for something kind of larger and transcendent, some sort of larger narrative that we can piece together about our present moment. But we don't have it right now.
Well, one thing it hit me not too long ago, it sort of made me throw up in my mouth a little bit, but it was realizing that I was born in the late 80s, so the 90s are sort of the first decade I really remember, and realizing that the 60s are as far from the 90s as we are from the 90s.
I do that all the time.
And you go, oh, wow, okay, so the distance gets clear there, but then also sort of shrinks. And as I think about this moment, I think you're right, there's not sort of a shared consensus anymore. Chuck Klosterman wrote a great book called The 90s, and he was sort of talking about how, September 10th, there were newspapers all over the country, and they were all doing their own headlines about what's happening in that city, right? And then...
You mean September 10th, 2000?
2001. That every market was its own market. And one of the things that happens after 9/11 and then with the advent of the internet is that everything is now national or global. And so it's interesting that we don't feel like we're a part of some big thing, but actually everything is more aligned than it is, less fractured, right? Because like there's less regional things, right? Every like even politics, they used to say all politics is local, but politics actually, local politics now is infected with national and global issues in a weird way. So I think there is this kind of thing where we're all in the same boat, hearing and watching and talking about largely the same things because everything's instantaneous with the internet. And then I would maybe define the zeitgeist also by an absence of anything working particularly well. Like, what institution, what organization, what group of, like, who or what would anyone describe as functioning particularly well? Like, who's doing great? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, what institutions are thriving? What organizations are thriving? It seems like most things are in some form of disarray or
Why do you think that is?
I don't know.
Oh, wise man.
I don't know. I mean, do you have an idea? Technology is obviously a disruptive force. A lack of, I think one of the reasons that a lot of the institutions aren't working is that they didn't do their jobs in big moments of stress. So there's, like, they talk about young people, like, millennials and then Gen Z, and then it's like they don't believe in capitalism or democracy or something because their entire life it has not been functioning well.
Right.
And so there's this kind of disillusionment that comes from they don't buy any of the logic or the stories or the narratives because they've only seen it proved to not be true.
But then why aren't they kind of creating their own world, their own myths, their own narrative, a new way of looking at the world? That's what we need from this young generation. It's a disgusting world they've inherited from the boomers, et cetera. And I can speak that, I am one of them. So
you guys really let us down.
Completely.
I see you as Gen X, though. I don't know why. I feel like you're more of a Gen Xer.
I'm on the borderline of it. It depends on how I feel during the day, whether I want to. But if I were young, I'd be really angry. I'd be wanting something else. I'd be creating something new. I'd be creating new styles. Now, I don't necessarily blame them because it's, looking at that, it's easy to say that. I didn't grow up in the internet generation. I didn't have that kind of effect on my thinking. But, when there should be a real sense of malaise and anger. It's a critical moment. We have to create something new. We have to create a new world order here. Instead, we're creating, I know we're going to get onto this, just doing toys, technological toys, AI, etc. We need a cultural movement now, something coming up from the bottom that's going to rescue us in this moment.
You're not an AI fan, right?
No, we were talking about that earlier.
Why not?
Well, you know how some foods can kind of rot out your body, how they're not good for you? They taste good, but they're not really good for you.
Right.
I think of AI in that way.
Okay.
So, I study a lot of languages. That was sort of my major in college. And I'm thinking back to the moment when I was 19 years old and I was at Berkeley, and I decided on the sudden whim, I was going to take this 6-week course where you learned 1 year of ancient Greek in 6 weeks. It was like the craziest thing I've ever been through, right? Every day you had an exam, every Friday you had a final exam. You were thinking, you were dreaming in ancient Greek. It was a fantastic experience, right? And I remember at one point, near the end, they gave us a passage of Thucydides, the hardest writer of all to read in ancient Greek. It's just impossible to decipher. I can go into the nuts and bolts of it.
It's not even easy in English.
It's not even easy in English. No, it isn't. You could read a sentence like 20 different ways. So I had this one paragraph, and I must have spent like 10 hours trying to translate one paragraph. I couldn't figure it out. I thought and I thought and I thought. Finally, I go, I think this is the answer. And I was kind of excited, and I thought, this is how it's going to work. And I turned it into my professor, this kind of crazy, hippie classics professor. And he goes, Robert, I see what you were thinking. I see where you were going. You were almost there, but you missed it. You completely mistranslated this beautiful paragraph, but you were getting at something. And that had an incredible impact on me even to this day. It made me realize that whenever you face a problem that you don't quite understand, you have to think more deeply. You have to use that anxiety of, is this right? No, it's not totally right. I have to go deeper into it, deeper and deeper and deeper. And I use that as a model for all of my work now when I'm writing a chapter or something. you haven't figured this out. You have to think more about it, right? You don't have it right. Well, what if in that moment I'd simply pulled out my translation of Thucydides and just copied the paragraph?
Yeah.
Or what if I had ChatGPT and I just put it in there and it gave it to me right away? Yeah. My thinking, the whole thinking process would have been annihilated right there. Sure. The whole process of the frustration, oh, I can't get it, oh, I'm not good enough, something's wrong with me, oh, I've got to go further and further and further. It developed character, it developed patience, it developed discipline, it developed self-esteem and humility. There's nothing more humiliating than facing a paragraph for 10 hours and not figuring it out, right? Sure. So you've got, kids nowadays who are never going to have that experience. Sure. They're going to be, getting prompts. No one's going to learn a foreign language anymore because you can just go to Mongolia and type in a sentence and ChatGPT will give you the translation. Sure. These incredible skills that the brain has are going to be atrophying, I fear. And that kind of process, the brain is so much more interesting to me than any piece of technology, I'm sorry. That's what we should be worshiping, not these little toys that we create.
Someone was asking me, someone was asking me actually just the other day about the sort of note card research system that I learned from you. And they were like, can you walk me through some of the pros and cons of doing sort of by hand note cards? Yes. And I said, well, the thing about the note card system is that all of the cons are actually pros, right? The fact that it is hard, that you can't scale it, that it takes forever, that your hand aches, that if you want to put one note card in two places, you have to do it 2 times, that it's physical, that you can lose, all of that is actually why it works, because you read something in a book, and then if you want to get it from the book to the note card, to maybe put it in your book or use it in a speech or what, you have to physically take it from here. It has to flow from your mind through. It's this process, right? And that it's hard is the reason that it works, and that you could highlight it and pass it from here to there and make an infinite number of, all the things that digital technology allows you to do are advantages in the sense that they remove the difficulty. But by removing the difficulty, they remove the point. They remove all the value.
Yeah. The writer Douglas Hofstadter said, if you want to climb Mount Everest, right, you have to spend weeks training and training and training and training. And then you finally reach the moment where you get there, and it's really horrible, and the oxygen and everything, and you could die, and you've got your Sherpas who might be dying. You finally get to the top. Whoa, how incredible. He said, ChatGPT is the equivalent of taking a helicopter to the top of Mount Everest and getting the same view. Well, why not?
Showing you a picture of it. It's even at least you got to see the view as a person, right? Like you're getting a refraction of a refraction of a refraction with these things, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
You were the best researcher I've ever had by far.
Thank you.
Right. So it was amazing. Okay. I had the worst researcher a couple of years ago. He's not here.
I imagine whoever it is doesn't think that they're the worst one, right?
No, God, no. And you know what he did? I told him my note card system. What he did is he literally digitally copied passages from the books, and I don't know how he did it. He printed them on the note cards. He didn't take the time to write and to think about what they might be. He just copied passages on note cards. Well, I could just read the whole book instead of going through your stupid note cards.
Sometimes I type the passages.
Oh, right.
I don't feel like it's cheating. It's still flowing through my body.
All right.
Doing it because my handwriting, I can't get it all on the card. It's the only way I can shrink the font down. And then I don't print it on the card to punish myself.
All right.
I print it out, and then I cut it out with scissors, and then I tape it, or I get one of my kids' glue sticks, I put that on.
Wouldn't it save so much more time just doing it by hand?
Well, for two reasons, no. One,
I mean,
again,
we're really
handwriting
boring people with this.
So it can't get in there. And then oftentimes that can introduce, my handwriting is so bad, I've found that I've been introducing errors, and then I have to go back to the text. So I'll get it right the first time.
All right.
You know.
I forgive you. It's all right. It's not a sin. That's okay.
Yes, but no, the fact. Do you ever read a book that's so good, and you're excited as you're reading it, but then also you're dreading that what it's going to take out of you at the end when you have to go through your note cards to do it in the note? I go, oh my God, I'm looking at the book, and it's like every page is folded, and I'm basically going to have to rewrite this book by hand.
I know. I have that all the time, yeah. And more often, I have a book that sucks so badly that it's not even worth half a note card.
Yes.
But sometimes they're worth like 60 note cards. And you're like, oh shit, I got to spend like 4 days, copying that out. I know.
You a 3x5 or a 4x6 guy?
I'm a 4x6 guy.
Me too. You know what I started doing? We're learning how to. You know what I started doing? This is how I knew I made it.
Didn't I tell you to do 4x6?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I get my own note cards printed for each book.
What do you mean?
Like with the title of the book at the top of the note card.
I don't understand.
Well,
Are you OCD or something?
No. What I'm saying, I mean, you can get your regular people note cards at the store, but these are 4x6 note cards. These are fancy. These are like monogrammed note cards. It says the title of the book at the top of the note card. So I'll give you. Okay. So for the virtue series, I'm doing the 4 virtue series, right? Courage, discipline, justice.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is what I did for this one. Actually, it's a little different than what I'm saying. So I got like 10,000 note cards printed from a printer down the street from the bookstore.
Oh.
And it says courage, discipline, justice, wisdom at the top of the note card. And when I'm doing the note cards, I circle which book that note card is going to pertain to.
Because you're researching more than one book at a time?
Well, sometimes I'm reading a book, there's such good stuff, but it's not for the book I'm doing now. I'm going to use it later. And then
okay.
So I've taken your system not for a singular book. I have 4 boxes for 4 books.
Yeah, okay.
And so some of the stuff that I didn't use in the first book moves over to the second, which moves over to the third. So I'm playing, 4-dimensional.
You're much better organized than I am. Because, first of all, you take only like a year or 2 to write a book. I take like 5 years or so. And, I know that there's something in there that will be good for my next book, but by the time I get to my next book, so many years have passed that it's just useless for me, Well,
I want to talk about that. So, first off, the reason my books are faster than yours is they're about 1/10 of the length. So we're running totally different rates. It's like a sprinter being faster than someone running a marathon or an ultra marathon in your case. I mean, talk to me about how do you work on something every day for 5 years? Like how do you delay gratification? Also, how do you keep yourself going when, for the first year, you're not even 20% of the way done, right? Like, I'm just trying to you don't even feel like the progress of getting closer to the end, really. How do you keep going?
Well, in the beginning, you're all excited. You're like an eager puppy about to go out for a walk. You've got all of this material. The whole world is open. I can read all of these books. It's fun. Mm-hmm. Then it starts getting a little bit painful after about a year. But the saving grace is each chapter is different. Each chapter is like a book, right?
Sure.
So I'm writing a book now on what I call the sublime. The first chapter is about the history of the universe. So I'm reading all of these science books.
I've read this chapter. It's like millions of years of history. In
billions.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I read a book called The First 3 Minutes, which is about the first 3 minutes of the universe. It's an incredible book, very technical, but incredible. The Big Bang, right? And then I'm immersed in that, and then it's over after about 5 months. And now I'm writing a book about evolution and the dinosaurs. And I'm going into the world of dinosaurs and animals and biology. Wow, how exciting. And then that's over, and by the end I'm kind of drained. And then I'm moving on to pagan religions. Each chapter is so exciting and different and weird. And human nature was like that. Rationality, narcissism. How can you not be excited about writing a chapter about narcissism? There's so much material. I had so much material from myself as well, It's fun. But if I had to write one book on narcissism for 5 years, I would kill myself. I would never make it.
So the diversity of it and the breadth of it is the feature, because it allows you to get excited about the component parts.
But I can tell you when you're like in chapter 5 and you've got 7 more to go and you go, oh man, I don't know if I can make it. You just got to have these mental strategies to kind of get you past those points, which I'm pretty good at.
Well, I'm trying to take this out of writing a little bit. Like when I swim, if I'm swimming a mile, which is a long distance, I get tired. I don't swim a mile, I swim 7 sets of 10.
Yeah, I do the same thing.
And then I got to do a couple more at the end, right? So what I'm feeling is I'm feeling like if I do one lap, I'm 10% of the way done with the set. And then 2, so I'm breaking it down these pieces and I'm creating the sense of momentum, the sense of being over the hump for this smaller component part.
Yeah.
And so you're not actually ever dealing with this sort of period of Paul Graham, who talked about in Mastery. He says there's the launch, and then he says you immediately go into the trough of despair. But I feel like if you break things up into component parts, you're actually never in the trough of despair, because you're always just starting a set, or you're just finishing a short set.
That's
so
right.
Breaking it up is a really good way to do hard things that take a long time.
That leads me to a question I wanted to ask you. So, your books have helped me a lot. I read them all the time. My favorite is Ego is the Enemy, but they're all really great. But I struggle with these things all of the time. So I meditate every morning, and as I'm going through my meditation, thoughts are piling up, going outside of me, and going, man, that's my ego talking. My ego is talking. I'm heading towards enlightenment in my meditation. I'm going, wow, if I get enlightened, I'll be so much better than anybody else. I will be the enlightened one. And all these other suckers, they're not, My ego is constantly bubbling up. Discipline, I'm always like, man, I'm so bored. I'm just going to read more about the Lakers, and I'm going to get into some trivia kind of thing. I'm struggling constantly with these things. You, the great master genius of these things, do you struggle as well, particularly with ego, which you described so brilliantly in the introduction to Ego is the Enemy? Are you still dealing with that?
Well, not only did writing the book not solve the problem for me, I then had to get it tattooed on my arms as a constant daily reminder. So, yeah, I think I wouldn't even say I'm better than most people at it. I would say I wrote about it because it's a thing I'm struggling with constantly, especially, I think what was unique for me, particularly with Ego, your story is, you're the sort of classic late bloomer. I mean, you wrote 48 Laws of Power. How old were you?
Do I have to say?
No.
I was 38 years old, older than you are right now.
Yeah, which is so different than my experience, and there's pros and cons to both, but I think, my first book came out I sold my first book when I was 24 years old. And then, got optioned to be a television show. There was all this stuff happened so young. I mean, even I think about what I saw when I was going through at American Apparel, none of that was healthy or normal. And I think it would have been very easy to spin off the plan. So clearly stuff worked at some level. But also, I was, the formative influences in my 20s were not people who lasted. I mean, they imploded and blew up their lives and burned out. And so I'm definitely having to think about that stuff all the time.
Who are you talking about?
Well, Dove's a good example.
Oh, yeah.
He's not doing so great.
Yeah.
But I mean, the idea is these people that I thought were teaching me how to do stuff were in fact teaching me a longer lesson on how not to do stuff.
Oh, you don't include me in that.
No, you're the last one standing.
Success is a very dangerous thing.
Yeah, you say success is more dangerous than failure.
For sure.
Or damaging than failure.
Particularly when you're young. And it's the kind of classic scenario that happens to hip-hop artists, one-hit wonders, you know. They're 22, 23, they have a great hit, they've got all the fame suddenly. They had nothing before that. And it's like a drug, and it goes to their head. And they can't do anything after that. It paralyzes them. And then afterwards, if their second album bombs, which usually happens, it's a phenomenon, they don't have the internal fortitude, the discipline, the skills, the character to deal with it. So success early on is very, very dangerous. And I can say for me, I had nothing but failure until I was 38. You know, my parents were starting to get really worried about their son, right? I had 50 different jobs. I had never worked more than 11 months at one job, right? Okay, so I knew failure, man. I knew what it's like to work in the worst, most boring offices with all the worst politicking going on. So I could never take it for granted. I could never rest on my laurels and go, wow, I'm successful. It's not a drug. You know, I knew how hard it was to get there, and I knew each time I write a book, it could fail. You know, even at this point, I still think my books are going to fail. So it's terrible to wait till you're 38. It's better to do it when you're 24, but it's also a blessing in a way. Amor fati.
It is what it is. I think I got lucky in the sense that, you know, I did a book my first book came out when I was 25, and it hit a bestseller for a week. And then, you know, I had to take a big step back. When I sold The Obstacles Away, I had to take half what I'd gotten for my first book.
Is that right?
Yeah, the publisher basically was sort of like, well, I guess, you know, and I remember someone told me they thought it would sell 5,000 copies, The Obstacles Away. And
that it would sell?
That was their guess.
And what is it now?
About 2 million.
Whoa!
But you know, actually they looked like they would be more right than wrong at first. I mean, it did okay the first week, but it didn't hit any bestsellers. And then it kind of just dribbled along. You know, it didn't really start taking off until it had been out for a year, and it sold more each subsequent year.
Yeah.
But there was no one moment where it just hit, right? And so it was quick, but then really steady. And so there was an adjustment curve to it, and I was too busy doing the next book and the next book and the next book to really notice how quickly it was picking up. And so, you know, I think one of the ways, I think, the antidote against the poison that is potentially success, like Tennessee Williams calls it the catastrophe of success, right? If you get it all at once, it can wreck you. If you're just working, if you're working on the next thing, the next problem, you are too busy to celebrate. You're too busy to let it go to your head. You're too busy to say that it says something about you as a person. You're just on to the next thing.
Yeah, that's a great lesson. I mean, I think of like, let's take Dove, for example, you know, a classic example. And
this is Dove Charney, the founder of American Apparel.
Yeah. And so he's an incredible entrepreneur. He's very charismatic. You know that we both kind of fell under his spell initially. And he becomes incredibly successful. An amazing story. This guy selling T-shirts out of his car in Montreal to this factory in Los Angeles. This beautiful factory employing thousands of people in Los Angeles doing regular work, being paid well.
Hundreds of millions of dollars a year in sales.
Amazing story. But he can't hold on to it. Why? That success, he can't adapt. So it's the classic story of someone who's really good at one thing, and he's really good at building the company and creating the design and the marketing, but he can't adjust to the next level, which is, I'm running a large company, I'm not a good manager of people, I'm kind of crazy, I'm insane, right? I yell at people, I'm out of control, I've got to get other people to handle it for me. But he can't make that adjustment. So your successes often makes you a prisoner of things that worked for you in the past.
Well, I've often used Dove as an example. I've told people, you know, on its face, the idea is insane. I'm going to make clothes in America. I'm going to pay people fairly. I'm going to not put logos or branding on them. I'm going to run my own stores. I'm going to do the photographs myself.
Right.
Everything that he did made it less likely that it would work potentially. It's all crazy, right? So everyone told him every step of the way, this is a bad idea, it won't work, don't do it.
And
so the catastrophe of his success is that he proved all those people wrong.
Now he can't do anything wrong.
Yeah, and he identifies that voice of don't do that, it's a bad idea, with those same very wrong people, and it becomes almost synonymous with haters or non-believers. And when they would say, hey, I think you should hire a better accounting staff, or you should bring in these people to support you, or hey, it's not only a bad idea ethically and morally, but it's illegal to have sexual relations with the people who work for you. And he's like, what do you know? You know? And he's so the success is the seed of his own destruction, and in some ways it's almost inevitable.
Well, look, he was a huge fan of the 48 Laws of Power. He called it his Bible.
Yeah.
He called me El Señor, which is deeply blasphemous, okay? Right? And so he has me on as a consultant. He brings me onto the board of directors, right? And you would think that he would trust my advice, that he was going to listen to me.
Yeah.
El Señor is giving him advice. But every time I tried to tell him, no, you can't do that, Dove. You need to change. What worked in 2003 with young women wearing this kind of sexy 80s clothes isn't where they're at 2011. Things are changing. You have to adapt. You have to think about what the next step is in what the trends are. Oh, yeah. He never listened to anything I said. And yet, so that to me is and I deal with that all the time as a consultant. People hire me to give them the advice that they wanted to hear in the first place, right? So...
Yeah, I remember there was the only person at some point who could reach him. I remember it got so bad that somebody called his mom, and his mom came and sort of pulled him out of a spiral he was.
Was that when he was sleeping in the factory?
Yes. Yeah. There's some Elon Musk vibes.
Oh my God, it's totally Elon Musk.
Yeah.
It's eerie how similar it is. It's the same kind of personality trait, the same disorder, the same micromanaging, the same thinking like, I can do no wrong. Even the stupidest little tweet I sent out is brilliant, Yeah, it's really weird.
And I think one of the things I took from that is a sort of a wariness of kind of very manic energy, bad habits, lack of structure.
Yeah.
Obviously I wrote Ego is the Enemy as American Apparel was pulling itself to pieces, but then the book I did after was about stillness, was me trying to rebuild my life out of the destruction that went going.
Yeah.
I remember I called someone that worked for me at 2 a.m, and my wife was like, what are you doing? You can't call people. This isn't how this works. But that's the habit that I had picked up and I had watched. I remember Dove would sometimes call me at late at night because he had to hear talking before he could go to sleep. He was, one, so lonely, but two, so dysregulated that he had to that's how he would come down. Yeah. And it was realizing that's not where good decisions come from. The sort of manic energy to come up and then the things to come down. You've told the story, but maybe you could, at that famous board meeting where the decision to what happened.
Jesus, I hope he's not here today.
Oh, I'm sure he came to visit. He and Kanye are both here.
Oh, yeah. That would be interesting. Are they friends?
He's running Kanye's fashion company.
Oh my God. Yeah. What a pair.
What a pair.
What
the
a match.
Anti-Semite and the Jewish hustler.
God, yeah. Jesus. It's a very dramatic moment.
Wait, sorry, I did talk to someone on record. I said, we were both there and we've been through all those epic, 5, I was like, how do you think their meetings go? When they sit down, who talks for 5 hours without break? Is it Kanye that gets to do it? Is it Dove that gets to do it?
I don't know.
They must just be fighting each other to be the craziest one.
I don't know. Maybe we have to join their company again and find out.
Then they call Elon and they just go.
Yeah. There's a movie in there.
There is. Sorry. So yes.
No. So
the famous scene.
Yeah. Well, so just put yourself in this position. I'm his friend. We'd hang out. We'd hang out in New York. We'd hang out here. We'd go to bars. We'd go to restaurants. We were friends because the guy's really interesting. He's funny. He's weird. He's manic, but he's also very interesting. Okay, he's a genius. But there's a point reached where this ship is going down, right? And it's going down fast. And he's crazy, and he's running it into the ground. And we've got 12,000 employees to look after. We have shareholders. It's a publicly traded company. You have responsibility to the shareholders on the board of directors. So we decide that we have to fire him, right? And I'm the linchpin of this, I hate to say, because as supposedly put on the board to be loyal, if I say no, then there's no way we can fire him. But I kind of go along, yes, we have to fire this guy. It's terrible. And so we have to disguise the whole, it's a conspiracy like you wrote about, right, with Peter Thiel.
Yeah.
We can't tell anyone, because the moment he hears anything of this, we're dead meat. He's going to fire every one of us and replace us, right? So it's like something, like a CIA, and we have to keep everything secret, all our emails, all our correspondence. And then we go to New York for the board meeting where we're going to fire him, and, quite nervous, what's this going to be like? And Dov comes into the room for a meeting, and he doesn't know what to expect. And the guy was, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Caine Mutiny with, okay, it's before your time, but Humphrey Bogart plays this captain of a ship who's literally going insane. He's like worrying about the strawberries that are being eaten in the refrigerator on his battleship as opposed to like the battles going on. And Dov was sitting here with like Nescafe, a bottle of Nescafe, and he was literally eating the Nescafe, scoop after scoop after scoop.
Of dry coffee powder?
Yes. Yes.
I would have rather him just done cocaine in front of me. That's less weird.
Well, he was like putting like a little bit of water in and then eating it and then scooping it out. It was disgusting. And then we fire him and he's so shocked, right?
Well, I think what's, just for people, we're getting a little into the weeds, but there was actually a choice. Isn't he offered a series of choices? Sort of a rational choice?
The choices were, are you going to be fired with cause or without cause? And in one way, you get...
Wasn't the third option you can resign and get like $1 million a year as a consultant? Like there was an option, a rational option where you walk away the winner.
Yeah. Well, he turned that down right away. His decision was to fight us every step of the way.
Yeah.
And then, it's all history. He goes with this $1 billion hedge fund that he somehow manages to seduce, but they're completely using him. And then the company just totally falls apart and it's destroyed. I regret in the end firing him because
it didn't work.
Because it would have been better to have him run the ship aground and for him to realize that he failed, as opposed to being able to blame us for that.
Right. Yeah, the problem is ultimately people don't want to learn the lessons.
No.
Not from their experiences.
Yeah.
But I feel like you and I learned a couple lessons from it.
Oh, yeah. I learned...
You got some good books out of it, too. So
you did. I learned that I can be a fool, that I can be conned, that I have a weakness, that the person who wrote about con artists in the 48 Laws of Power himself was conned, was seduced by this guy. And I was brought on as basically a patsy, a tool that would be loyal to him, that he could kind of manipulate the way he wanted to. It was a deep reckoning with my own weaknesses, to be honest with you.
But you were in good company. That's something that I took from it in the sense that I watched multiple billionaires. I watched Dov give them tours of the factory. They knew what they were getting into. They knew the history, right? They knew what had happened. They knew the lawsuits. They knew all of it.
I know.
And each time he would manage to convince and persuade the so-called smartest, best judges of talent in the world
I know.
to give him millions of dollars. And I watched the ability that we have to fool ourselves, in Wall Street you go, it's different this time, but also the idea, it's going to be different with me, right?
Yeah.
That it's going to work out for the Mavericks with Kyrie Irving. Of course it's not, character is fate, the Stoics would say, right? Like it's not going to be different. It's in the blood, and to realize how good we are at fooling ourselves, at seeing what we want to see. That's one of the laws of human nature.
Yeah, it is. But I wrote the books about that, so it's a little more galling for me to fall for it than billionaires who think they're going to make a lot of money out of it. Whereas I'm not going in this for the money, you know. So anyway.
Well, I want to get to the questions, but I did think we should wrap up with the idea of mortality, the ephemerality of life.
It's a good way to end.
As we come to the end of the talk,
Yeah.
I've been fiddling with this memento mori ring. It's sort of the one of the reminders that I have this sort of physical touch. I think it's so interesting. Like in the ancient world, death was everywhere, right? Nobody died in a clean hospital down the street, Nobody, very few people lived all the way to, old age. Infant mortality was high. The average lifespan was shorter. People died in plagues and in accidents of small cuts.
And then anytime you were eating animals, you saw the blood in front of you. You were cutting that chicken's head right out in front of you. You saw the blood oozing out.
Yeah, even warfare, it's not you're shooting an artillary shell 6 miles away.
You're stabbing right in front of you.
Ripping the sword out of them.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a gruesome world. And yet, it was the ancient world that needed, for some reason, to have these reminders of memento mori, that life is short, that you could go at any moment, that you're not invincible. The irony is we're the ones that need the reminders because we have the evidence that you are going to live longer. We have the actuary tables. We have, when somebody, the slightest sign of sickness, they're taken away, and you're just not seeing it. And so I just think it's so interesting that the people who need it most are the most out of touch with the fundamental fact of their existence.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about it a lot lately because, as you know, I came very close to dying myself. I had a near-death experience. So I've been thinking about it a lot lately and trying to recreate what actually happened and what I could learn from it. And I decided that it's not so much death that's so interesting to look at. It's dying itself, the process of dying. Everybody who dies, obviously, if they don't die suddenly, they go through several weeks and they have to go through that. And there are people like myself who come back from the dead, literally, right? And so, what does it mean to actually feel like you're dying? Are we going over time? Am I dying right now? Okay. All right. Okay. And so, I think about that moment. So I was driving here in Los Angeles. Anna was in the car seat next to me, and she sees something really odd going on, and she's forcing me to pull over. I go, no, everything's fine. And then suddenly, I'm getting out of the car, and I'm doing all sorts of strange things, and my whole sense of time and space is shifting. It's distorting. I don't know where I am, and what seems to be 15 minutes of me doing things is actually 2 minutes, which she tells me. And then the next thing I know is I'm unconscious, right? And I could have easily been dead at that point. And if I'm dead, obviously I'm not here. And, it's not a bad way to die. You just go to sleep and that's it. It's not painful at all. Having a stroke isn't painful, generally speaking. Your blood stops flowing to your brain and you go, you're unconscious, right? And then I wake up and I'm in a gurney with other gurneys piled on top of me. And I went, what the hell just happened to me? Am I actually dead right now? I don't know. I don't know what's going on. And for a moment, I'm kind of looking at myself from up above the sky, and I'm looking down at my grave, and my mother and Anna are there, kind of talking about me, and I have this sense, well, I died, but that's all right. Life goes on, etc.
Not for you.
Huh?
It doesn't go on for you.
No, it doesn't go on for me, it goes on for them. But what wakes me up is I have to pee with incredible, and then it was, I'm alive, all right? I haven't died. And for some reason, I start yelling in Spanish. I'm yelling, suéltame, suéltame, por favor, no puedo respirar, tengo que orinar, etc., etc. I don't know why. I'm like, my brain has been, a bit jumbled up, so to speak, all right? And then the next few days, I'm like joking with everybody, and people don't understand. I'm like euphoric, right? And then, of course, a week later, I realized, no, I'm a cripple. It's the worst thing that happened to me. But I was like giddy for that first week. And when I think about it, it teaches me something very elemental. So our idea of who we are, of the place we live in, our whole reality, it depends on our brains. Our brains construct this world for us that we take completely for granted. We don't realize that it's actually a construction. And when your brain goes haywire, like it did for me, because I have a blood clot and blood isn't flowing to it, it's all an illusion. The self is an illusion. You don't actually have an ego. You don't have a self. Space and time don't really exist. They're this kind of weird, distorted mirror that we live through, but they don't actually exist. And then the most amazing thing of all is I'm alive. And I carry that with me now, and I go, it is so strange to be alive. Do you understand how strange it is to be alive? You have to understand that by first being nearly dead. But just to be conscious, just to be aware, just to realize that I'm here talking to Ryan Holiday with, 900,000 people here is absolutely insane. History is insane. Automobiles are insane. Birds and cats are insane.
The sheer probability of any of this existing is incomprehensible.
Yeah. And it just made me so aware of that every single moment of my life. And I have a chapter in my new book, Awaken to the Strangeness of Being Alive. And so we should listen to these people who have these amazing stories coming back. I'm cataloging them and I'll be writing about them in my new book. But dying teaches us so much about how our life is actually an illusion, it's a construction, and that there's something else out there.
Don't you sometimes wear the shirt as a reminder, the shirt that the
paramedics do? So when the paramedics came, I was wearing this new shirt that Anna had gotten me for my birthday, and I loved it. It was this plaid shirt, and I wore it all the time. They came and they ripped it off and they cut it and shredded it with scissors, right?
To get to your heart, or
to be able to get rid of the blood clot. And 8 months later, I asked Anna, "Where's that shirt? I love that shirt." And she told me the pathetic story of my favorite shirt. And she said, "Well, they actually gave it to me in a bag when you left the hospital." I go, "Where's that bag?" She brought it to me, she pulled it out, and it was in these pieces. And I go, "Could you please sew that back together again? I want to wear that shirt." Speaking of memento mori, and I wear it now all the time. And it's got these Frankenstein stitches across it. But hell, it looks very fashionable, And I wear that shirt with pride.
And it's a reminder to you. What's so interesting is you have this powerful, overwhelming experience, but with time, I imagine it fades a little, and you have to have things that bring you back to it, that connect you to the urgency of that experience.
It fades, but it doesn't really fade. So I constantly dream about it. I had a feeling in my bones like life was sucking its way out of me, and all the blood was leaving me, and my bones were getting soft. I still have that feeling. I still have a visceral connection to death, And yes, it's faded. But you try spending 5 minutes tying your shoes every morning, and you're reminded of that experience very graphically every moment of your life.
Well, that's beautiful. It's haunting. Beautiful also.
Yeah.
Should we do questions?
I think we should.
All right. So I think there's a mic somewhere. If you could maybe adjust the light slightly so you can see?
I can't see anybody.
And Dawson, will you check the camera? I thought I heard it go off.
Ah, there we go. Wow. How exciting.
Yeah, who wants to go first? And we're doing short questions, no two-part questions, no speeches masquerading as questions.
Yeah.
And also, if we don't like the question, we'll answer our own question.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Ryan, and just thank you guys for both being here and giving us this time to answer questions and give us the overview. Robert, you are inspiration to so many of us. I came to see you guys out actually in San Francisco.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that.
No, thank you. Sorry to hear your book with Sublime. You actually inspired me with the painting with the inner Athena. I think it was in the 50 Cent book. But my question is this. In 100 years, you guys talk about what are people going to look back. Where do you want your legacy? If we were to write you into one of your chapters or write you into, a theme like you have of all the great historians, which I put you as, where would you think of yourself as your legacy? Where do you want us to remember you?
Well, if people are still reading my books in 100 years, that would be absolutely fantastic, and the sense that, I wrote the book, The 48 Laws of Power, at a particular historical moment, the Clinton era, all the weird stuff going on, Wall Street, the early tech bubble. So there was a moment in history, and I didn't write about any of that. I wrote about Louis XIV, I wrote about Cesare Borgia, I wrote about Julius Caesar, all these weird figures in history. And so if I kind of transcended my moment and wrote something that people 100 years from now can go, that's still applying to me because people are still political, people are still weird, they play all of these weird games, and Robert described it. I'll be dead, I won't know about this, but that would be a fantastic thing that I transcended my cultural moment and wrote something that lasted. I would love that to be my legacy.
One of my favorite passages in Meditations is Marcus Aurelius goes, two things. One, you won't be around to enjoy your posthumous fame. There's people who strive to be remembered, forget they won't be able to enjoy it. And then he goes, it's also worth noting that people in the future will also be stupid and annoying and not appreciate things too. So the idea that you'll be vindicated by the future is also probably a fool's errand. So I just try to think about, did I do a good job? Did I say what I wanted? Was it the thing that I wanted to make? And am I proud of it? And I sort of leave the rest.
Very wise.
Thank you both.
Yeah,
we study your books, we don't read them. Thank you.
Go for it. You're up.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Ryan. So
You may have to talk a little louder on that mic. That mic doesn't seem right.
Question is for you. Just a little backstory. My best friend, before he passed away in a motorcycle accident, he noticed how my life was going and gave me a suggestion to read The Shortness of Life by Seneca.
Right.
And but 6 months later, he dies. Wow. It took me over 5 years to actually get that book and read it. And there's this one sentence that never ever leaves my head whenever I am actually thinking of that I'm wasting my life away, which is like whenever you see a man and he has wrinkles and gray hair, he has not lived for long, he has existed for long.
Yes.
So I've been dying to ask you this question regarding what is to live rather than exist in that context.
Yeah, he talked about in that essay, which is one of the most beautiful things he ever wrote. He said, be sure that at the end of your life you have more to show for it than a large number, right? He said, I don't think he doesn't mean like financially, like the number in a bank account. He means, you get 100 years, that's an impressive number, but what matters is, what you did with that time, right? So I don't know if I don't think there's some general rule of what it is to live, but the question is, did you do what you could do with the time that you had, right? To me, I think about, did I leave potential on the table? Did I leave opportunities on the table? Did I leave experiences on the table? Did I leave things unsaid, not in my work, but to people that I care about? So to me, living is just, it's in line with a piece of advice you gave me. I remember when I was thinking about leaving American Apparel, you said there's 2 types of time in life. You said there's alive time and dead time. Yeah. Dead time is passive and waiting and resigned, and a lifetime is embracing and living and doing. And I just try to, I'm not perfect at it. There's certainly been periods of dead time in my life, but I remind myself of that constantly, a lifetime versus dead time. And if more often than not I'm doing lifetime than dead time, I think that sort of cumulatively adds up to a pretty good number.
Yeah, I think of Leonardo da Vinci, who had a quote at the end of his life saying, when you die, it's like after you've worked really hard during the day, you've toiled at something, you go to sleep and you have this great feeling like you accomplished something. But when you die, do you have that same feeling? Like, I did something, I accomplished something, now I can die in peace. And I think the worst thing is, in life would be to reach the age of 60, 65 and go, God, I could have been so much more. I could have created something. I could have done what I said I was going to do. I could have written that book, but I didn't. To me, I tell anybody, if you're in your 20s, don't ever have that feeling. And it'll come quicker than you imagine. So, realize that you want to reach that end with a sense of, I did what I felt I could do when I was a child. I had these dreams and I reached them.
All right, next.
Sorry, Robert, thank you for mastering. That saved me from a mediocre job.
Okay, you're very welcome. Where's my check?
I am like you, Robert. I straddle baby boomers and Gen Zers, and growing up from the boob tube to the smaller boob tube. It seems like my big concern, I have a daughter who's grown now, and she's managed to navigate it. The next generation doesn't appear to be the dopamine hit generation. We talked about it, you guys talked about it earlier, about how the future and where we're going with all this, but you guys as historians, I kind of want to go back and spend a little time because we learned from our past. Is that capable, is that even relevant in today's new tech generation where we're headed? So if you guys could just opine on where we're headed, where you possibly see we could be headed with chat, AI and everything else. Thank you.
Well, the way I look at it is the time that you live in is a resistance factor. It's like when you're swimming, you get stronger because you're moving against the force of the water. When you're weight training, you have the resistance of the weight. When you live in a cultural moment, there are all kinds of bad habits, obsessions, addictions that can happen. It happened in the 50s. Look at how people were smoking and drinking, etc. They exist. They're television. So you want young people to resist the times. You can make yourself stronger than I ever could have been if you develop discipline, if you work against all of the addictions, all of the sugar rushes, all the dopamine fixes that people are surrounding you with. If you cut short your time on Instagram, if you force yourself to learn a foreign language, if you get your children to play the piano, etc., they're going to be the biggest weirdo in their neighborhood. People are going to wonder what's wrong with that. But they are going to be the masters of the future. So use these bad times as a resistance factor to make yourself even stronger.
Hey guys, big night. I'm a little hesitant to ask you this question in front of this many people, but my girlfriend will thank me that I'm not bogging her down with it tonight. If I fell down a rabbit hole recently, like the Asian Apocalypse on Netflix, the Graham Hancock's talking about human history is much older than we think, much older than Egyptians, Sumerians, that humans were left hunter-gatherer society a long time ago. If you guys have ever fallen down that rabbit hole, and what do you make of it? And then, just because I am so curious, all the UFO, UAP stuff, because you guys think way more than I do, and I would just love to hear what you think.
I don't really know. I don't understand that.
I'm a crazy guy.
It's some sort of conspiracy theory stuff about UFOs or some counterintuitive or theories about whether the Earth civilizations are much older than we think they are. I don't think either of us are qualified.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, on the question of is there life out there, I read a great book called Aliens that explains the unlikeliness of it. And if you look at planet Earth, they have all of what we call bottlenecks. So if the dinosaurs hadn't been decimated 65 million years ago by a meteor, none of us would be here. The world would have been completely changed. But there were about 50 of these bottlenecks throughout the course of evolution that had to fall exactly right for humans to be on the planet right now. So for that same process to occur on another planet, the odds are absolutely astronomical. But of course, there are an astronomical number of planets, so it's possible that one or two out there have that. But then to travel 8 billion light years, no person can live that long, so it can only be silicon life, robots that could ever travel that far. It was a very, interesting argument, but that's as far as I'll go there. Sorry. I hope that was, yeah. Go for it.
Hi, Ryan Robert. My name is Kate Pinchot. Ryan, I follow your research assistant Billy on LinkedIn.
Oh,
he recently wrote something.
Robert knows Billy.
Oh yeah, so it gets into. I'm going to get into my point. He recently wrote something about how a conversation he had with you, Robert, about why Ryan. I'm glad you talked about it. How Ryan was your best research assistant, and how everybody else that succeeded fell short.
Yeah.
And he talked about how you paused when explaining to him why that a lot of them didn't really grasp onto the idea of being interested in boredom.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering what your maybe deeper thoughts were on why people in their own creative acts, why they aren't interested in boredom, and maybe Ryan, you could briefly touch on in your own process how you kind of embrace boredom, and maybe why that made you stand out over time.
Well, boredom is a great thing in life. You want boredom. If you don't experience moments of boredom, then something is wrong with you. And the reason is that when you're bored, you have to develop internal skills for dealing with it. You have to learn how to, with your own mind, find ways to entertain yourself. And so the worst thing that happens are people go for instant gratification, right? We are animals that want pleasure in life. We are drawn to things that are pleasant, and we're not drawn to things that are unpleasant. But if you can deal with boredom, you understand that greater things will happen if you postpone your need for immediate gratification, right? So boredom is teaching you something. It's telling you develop your own skills. So instead of grabbing a video game to entertain yourself, when I was a kid, not that we were superior back then, please don't get me wrong, we had to invent games to deal with the boredom when our parents left us alone. We had to become creative and inventive. So you want to feel boredom. Boredom means that you have to do something yourself to get over it. You have to develop those internal muscles and go, I've got to entertain myself. I can't turn on a show. I can't play this game. I have to do it from something from within. If you listen to it and it will develop your character. If you listen to it and you learn the lessons from it properly.
I think also it's when you love it, when it's fascinating to you and exciting, it's actually not boring. So all the things that maybe other people thought were boring or they couldn't get through, I was riveted by it. Getting to listen to hundreds of hours of interviews was tedious in the sense that I'm transcribing it.
You mean the 50-cent tapes?
Yeah, but I found that to be fascinating. I thought I would tell myself, how much would someone pay to listen to this, right?
Yeah.
And what would a reporter be making of it? So you find different lenses to look at it that allows you to get excited about it, and then it's not boring.
And if you have a terrible crap job, like I had so many of them, if you approach it that I'm learning about people, I'm learning about what I hate, I'm learning about people's weird psychology, that boring job flipping burgers suddenly becomes a kind of an education for you.
Great question. We got time for just a couple more.
Wow.
I know, I'm sorry. This is
Go fast.
Yeah. We'll burn through.
Hi. I wanted to say thank you because you've been such an inspiration to me and lots of people in this room. But here's my question. I know that writing can be super, super duper frustrating at times. So how is it that you tackle burnout and how do you get through that?
I mean, for me, there's the sort of writing process, and then there's the recovery process, which is, usually physical. So I'm balancing out the mental exhaustion with running or swimming or bike riding or walks or doing other stuff, right? So you take it as far as you can go in sort of one lane and one modality, and then you switch to the other, and it's this sort of hot and coldness of it that helps balance it out. So I know you have physical practices that you do. Having that, I think, helps you. You're not just sitting in a chair, just pushing yourself. You're getting out of the chair and doing other stuff that helps keep you going.
And it also helps to be extremely excited by what you're doing and deeply engaged so you can deal with the grind and the loneliness. Writing is a very lonely profession, you know. And so you develop all kinds of weird strategies and things like that. But being in love with what you're doing is a great way to get over the grind and the moments where you want to give up.
Great question.
Thank you.
Just wanted to say thanks before I ask my question. I'm here for both of you. I'm a 50-year-old. Appreciate you both. Your wisdom and books has helped me greatly in life. My question is in regards to virtue. You both speak of virtue. Obviously, there's the noble virtues that the Stoics speak of, and living with virtue to achieve eudaimonia, right? To live a well-flourishing life. And wisdom, courage, temperance, or discipline, as you say, Ryan. And justice, I feel like, is missing in a lot of the world. I think when Robert, you talk about figuring out where the world is today, I feel like a lot of that's what's missing is virtue. I just would love to hear how you both view that, how you both view these virtues, and eudaimonia, and your thoughts on that.
I yield to Ryan because he's the person who writes about those things.
Yeah, it's funny. I wrote in The Obstacles Away, obviously, that these things we experience in life are opportunities, right? And when I was writing The Obstacles Away, I was much more thinking about it in a sort of a business context, a success context. How do you use this setback to come up with this creative idea, or how do you use this, constraint as a way to spring forward? And that's what that book is about. And that's Stoicism as a sort of success hack or strategy, which it is, and I stand by it, and I think it's interesting. But as I've gotten older, as I've thought more about it, and now I'm doing this series on the cardinal virtues, I think what Marcus Aurelius is really saying, when he's saying that, the impediment to action advances action, stands in the way, becomes the way, what he's specifically referring to is that every situation, good or bad, big or small, is an opportunity to practice one of those virtues, right? To be brave, to do the right thing, to be disciplined or strong, right? To be wise, to learn. And they're all sort of inseparably intertwined with each other as well. And so what I think of virtue, as we were talking about backstage, arete, the idea of sort of moral and physical excellence, as being what we always have the opportunity to do, right? So if you take virtue as this thing, this form of excellence, and then you go, okay, whatever I'm doing, wherever I am, whatever I'm experiencing, I have this opportunity to be great, right? To be excellent. That's how I think about it.
Robert, any thoughts on it?
No. He expressed it very well.
Thank you both.
You're very welcome.
I will give you the last. Sorry.
How do you know something you've written is too long or too short or not well edited enough?
Well, I'm guilty of always writing too much, but You know, I work in chapters. I don't work in the whole book length. And I'm very attuned to the reader. And the worst thing is I'm going to be boring my reader with this. So I know when that chapter is 20,000 words long, it's way too long. It's starting to bore me. My eyes are glazing over. I've got to cut it. 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 I've got to cut that chapter down to a size that I think a reader will be engaged in it, will be excited, will learn from it. The stories are taught. I don't like wasted words. I don't like wasted verbiage. I want it to be clean and compact and forceful. And when it gets to that point, then it's great. And unfortunately, with the laws of human nature, it's a 560-page book. And I didn't go out intending to write that. But the shock of it all is that book is selling really well. It's selling better than the 48 Laws of Power right now. So, I think it's more like...
I hope so. It nearly killed you.
Yeah, exactly. It did. Thank you. He's right. Like 2 months after I had my stroke, 2 months after writing about mortality, I faced it. But each chapter felt like it was right, and then it was 560 pages long. My books aren't meant to be read cover to cover, so I think I can kind of get away with that strategy.
I mean, you do have to be ruthless. You do your first draft, and you try to get it all down, and then you have to go, what's extraneous here? What actually isn't essential? And it's this process of winnowing and refining and reducing it down till there's everything that needs to be there, and there's none of the things that should not be there. And that's the hardest part, because writing is a creative act. So it's fulfilling and exciting and additive. And then the process of having to cut things that you were excited about, that you love. Stephen King talks about killing your darlings. It is a brutal process. And there's little tricks, like I sometimes keep a separate Word document, and I'm cutting stuff, and I go, I'm going to use that later. I'll use it in something else. I never touch it again. It's just a lie I'm telling myself so it doesn't feel like I'm killing something that means so much to me. But I know that if I don't do it, if I'm not brutally honest and don't hold a firm line with it, I'm abusing the most important thing that there is, which is the reader's time and the reader's trust. And so, a rule is like, if you're bored by it, certainly the reader's going to be bored by it, but also, just when did you use 2 words when one will do, right? When did you make your point more than you need to make it? And just that is a brutal process that you do over and over and over again. Maybe an editor comes in, but it's the hardest part. It's the hardest part.
But then when you get it right and it reaches that point where you go, yeah, I finished it, you tie the knot and it's over, it's a great feeling. You expressed it in a short way, and it's what you wanted, and it's a great feeling. And believe me, I have so many things that I've cut out. It is very painful, as Ryan says, but in the end, it's all for the good, because I want my reader to be as excited as I was when I was writing it. As Robert Frost says, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. No excitement in the writer, no excitement in the reader. So when I reach that point and go, yeah, this is it, it's a great feeling. It's almost euphoric.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you all very much. I guess we'll have to do it again to answer all these questions, right, Robert?
Yeah. How about?
We will. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.